Okay, very good. So we are 6:54, and we are resuming our special meeting, May 17th, and we are on item 3.3? 3.2, under bylaw 600/23, 2023 property tax rate. So, we've got some options, Mr. Frank?
Well, your worship, members of council, if you add 10% to the, and I'm referring to the handout, this handout that you gave. Your farmland taxes in 2022 generated 2,308,000. So if you add 2% or 10% to that, it takes it up to 2,539,000, which then would give you a mill rate of 3.23. And then if you did the same thing down below where your industrial generated 18.971, and you added 10% to that, it would then generate 20,910,000, which then would reduce their tax rate to 12.5515.
Which is the same as last year.
And then you would then be able to collect $23,449,970, which is a 10% increase. Smoke rolled in.
What's the mill rate then, under the non-residential machinery and litter?
It lowers it to 12.5515.
Which is the tax rate for.
Sorry,
2022.
12.5265.
So we decrease
Sorry.
it.
Looked at the wrong column.
12.52.
65.
As opposed to 12.928.
As proposed. Last year's mill rate was 12.5515.
Say that again, 12.2 what?
12.5265.
Thank you. And it would bring the total to
$23,408,347.
Roughly
What did you get?
$700,000 difference.
23,408,053.
Yeah,
What
so
did I do?
she's got a better rounding number than I do.
So what's your rounding number then?
It is 23,000.
23 million.
23,408,346.83.
347. So I'm right.
Yeah. Well,
So I'm right.
323,408.
We're gonna be.
Holy cow, that come in hard. Did
I haven't seen a weather report.
they're not doing the Fox Creek update tonight.
Well, we don't get the same report since they switched crews.
Yeah, let's get this supposed to switch. That's all I thought today. So your worship, members of council, if you do change the tax rate and in order to us to comply, we would then have to run upstairs, do the amendments to the tax rate bylaw so that council has it in front of you. We can't pass a bylaw. I mean, you've got a difficulty when we have an well, we can email it to them. Yeah.
So, when we go through the general municipal then, do we know what those tax rates are gonna be? Like, we can just fill them out here, I'd just like to know.
the mill rate will be 3.2310 for residential.
3.2, for residential improvements?
Yeah, residential and farmland, it will be 3.2310.
Yeah.
And then for industrial, would be 12.5265. So with that, it will be a decrease by 0.2% compared from 2022 mill rate.
Okay. We're still going up
And it leaves you no room for any appeal. Well, no, sorry, it does, yeah.
So we end up with $1 million at the end of it, right?
No,
Instead of 1.7.
748,000,
Right.
and you have a $1 million appeal already anticipated. Now, that'll change slightly, but
It could force us into reserves if the appeal goes through.
Yeah.
and that's one of many, right? That, we know of.
So what's our next step here?
Well, do we wanna go with that rate, or do we wanna? It's up to council, so Councillor Cush and then Councillor Preston.
My one question comes on our cost side. When we were doing the budgeting for the cost side, because we didn't have the assessment value at that time, what were we using as a base growth on the assessment? I'm just assuming that it wasn't anywhere near roughly 9% that we have from 22 to 23. So I'm just wondering how come it seems like we're over budgeted on expenses?
Your worship, members of council, because there are changes, you could be at the time that the tax rate bylaw was changed, there was amendments that created additional assessment, right? So that's the difficulty. Plus, none of this takes into any of your penalties and, not penalties, arrears that people can pay, right? They become, so your taxes become accounts receivable, right? If they, at the end of the year, then they continue to be accounts receivable. We then tax the following year, but if they pay in that year, it's considered additional revenue, right? Because you've already put it on the books as an accounts receivable, right?
And what's I know under our recovery plan, we had 3 million budgeted for doubtful accounts.
We will now
This one
move
is
that down
one?
to $1 million.
1 million.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Prestige.
Through the chair to Lord. This company that is gonna challenge their taxes, so does that mean they're not gonna pay their taxes and it could take a year and a half to?
No. Your worship, members of council, I know that these individuals are good corporate citizens. They will pay their taxes on time, and then they will get a rebate if they're successful, right? Because no matter what, taxes are due on June 30th, and we apply the penalty, and if they're successful, their penalty doesn't come off.
Okay. Councillor D?
And just one other thing, our ratio between residential and industrial changed as well slightly, right?
Yeah, slightly. It would be not a whole lot different.
I got 3.87.
3.87.
Yeah, yeah. Your worship, members of council, and again, I'm not, the money that is any additional revenue has been put into reserve. So that because of the tax rate, right, we continue to stay on our 3% revenue increase with additional revenue, and I don't want to, but our expenditures have not changed from the time. We had a 1% growth, right? And we continue to do that, and even in the changes of the budget. So the new growth, the additional revenue that were created because of the change in assessment is being put into reserves. It's not being spent.
So mechanically then, what I heard you say earlier is you would have to go and put these numbers into a formal tax bylaw that we could then vote on.
Yeah, you have to, the act is clear that you have to see it in front of you before you can vote on it. The third and final reading.
Okay, so I don't know if we need that in motion, but are you comfortable with those numbers?
I can support that, yeah. And I think that gets us where we need to be, Councillor
My
Cook.
concern is though, if this challenge comes through off the reduced rates we're doing here and it's accepted, it's gonna be more than we're putting in reserves off this budget that's coming off. So we could be using up some, or having to find other money or pull out of our reserves to make up what we have in here or make other cuts in the budget.
It's my understanding we put 1.7 into reserves, and if that appeal is successful, it'll be $1 million.
That's off this, but are we talking, the tax bylaw isn't without reducing the,
No, that 1.7 is still in.
yeah, so, no, the 1.7 won't be
It's
in.
not in.
No, that's what we're
No,
Not under the new,
it's,
under the existing tax rate bylaw you have in front of you, you put away $1.7 million.
yeah, they said it'll be 700,000 will go into reserves off the new numbers, and if that challenge comes through, that's another $1 million off that. So
Yeah.
that could put us $300,000 under where we're at.
Okay,
And that's one appeal. And we know that your assessment has changed because of the inflation numbers and some of the modifiers that were taken off, or obsolescence that was taken off. And that was your April 5th presentation to council.
yeah, that changes my mind then.
Well, see, and remember when we were talking about that 1.7 at the last meeting? And I said, so if we commit to this 1.7, we're not nailed down on our mill rate. I asked that question, and the answer was no, we're not nailed down on it. And now the answer is, we were nailed down on it. So we set the mill rate under the last, not this meeting, but the last meeting, because that's where the numbers were generated from.
Your worship, all I'm saying is the bylaw can't be passed until you have, so if you give it first reading and you amend it, right, you have to see it in front of you. That's all it is, right? And we have to go and do that calculation.
Yeah, that-
Normally what happens is you do it at the next council meeting in 2 weeks. Unfortunately, the instructions weren't followed when I left on holidays.
Councillor Cush?
What I think the Reeve is trying to say is last week when we had the budget numbers that we looked at that 1.7 and stuff, we were asking, we didn't know what the mill rate was at that point. We didn't know what the assessment had come in, but it sounds like administration at that point, if they had those numbers already generated, already had those numbers basically, in their mind of what they wanted to reach, but we hadn't seen that yet.
What you were told at the last meeting was that the revised assessment numbers were gonna be on Friday and they were gonna be incorporated in the new tax bylaw, right? Tax rate bylaw, right? The budget that was put aside, again, was based on those numbers, and she did incorporate that in her presentation. So the 1.7, if you go back and we could probably pull it up, is the 1.7 million in reserves hasn't changed. That was presented to council.
So the 1.7 is still there even if we do this 10% change?
No, it's now 748,000. Right?
Okay. When, does
Yeah.
everyone remember me asking this at the last meeting or no?
I remember it being asked, yeah.
And she incorporated the budget adjustment. Remember, we told you it was $2.3 million in increased revenue, and we saw that.
Yep.
Can I have it all? Thank you. is the new one? Oh, this is in, well, this is the same. This is yours, right? Oh, we give it to council. This is council one? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, this is the council. So it was 2,043,503. There was additional other revenue, right, from grants, sale of surplus, new fees, et cetera, right? It came up to $2.477 million. Then we said we had some expenditures, and I'm not gonna list them, but they came to 234,000. So left you in excess of revenue of 2.275. Then council talked about the other capital items that were included. One was the low income, the White Court gate security, the enhancements to their radio system, and the vehicle hoist, right? That was 295,000. So the total of the new revenue without and the total of the new expenditures, it basically equaled themselves out. But you ended up having a $1.98 million surplus, right? I thought it was 1.78.
so if we lose on the million on this one, we're still putting 980,000,
That's correct.
now we're okay.
Unless that $1 million,
No, that's with
with
million. That's with the.
That's at the current mill rate in front of you.
this one,
Yeah.
Right.
No,
yes.
that's right, yeah.
So if we reduce it, that
Yeah.
could put us at nothing in the reserves unless we under budget on stuff, or over budget on our, I guess, our expenses.
And there could be other appeals.
And there could be other amendments, right? Municipal Affairs does that throughout the year. Like from February to May, they did an $8 million assessment revision.
Yeah, that's right on that other thing.
And that was included in these numbers.
Right, but
Right.
not in our assessment presentation.
Those numbers are now taken into consideration, right? When we put our new tax rate bylaw, right?
Yeah.
So if we go with the original one, we have the possibility of making it 1.7 million. And with the possibility of losing that after. And if we go with the second one, we have the possibility of being in the hole.
Councilor Kush?
Which is bringing back my question I had before, if we're only doing, I think it was a 1% increase in capital and expenditures and everything across the board, and we're at, with the assessment value and the tax rate value, we're at a 12% increase. When we were only supposed to be going up on our plan, or our recovery plan was at 1% our expenditures, I believe, capital and operating.
Yeah, it was 1% in the expenditures, not in capital, right?
Yeah.
Capital, you said 3 million for the first 3 years, and then you would reevaluate in the
Yeah.
fourth. And you've increased your capital expenditures in the fourth year.
How much?
Right. Do you have 4 million, I think you're at? You were at 370, 3.7 at the end of the year, December 31st, and what did our new number come to?
The new number?
4 point,
It said on the bylaw,
oh, is it on the bylaw?
yeah, on the copy.
4.6.
1.6 million next year.
Yeah.
Our expenses basically went up an extra two between that and that one, like $2 million. Now, like, Councilor Will on the same, I mean, I understand we're still at a deficit where we should be in our our capital side, but unfortunately, that's where a lot of the extra from the assessment is going.
And now that we're at the 4.6, so that's 2.4 away from the 7.
Yep.
So we're only 2.4 short of balanced on capital spending. It's close.
But that's it, this one, not at just 10%, correct?
That's it. This one, yeah.
That's
At
this one.
the current tax rate, but. Your worship and members of council, and again, I understand the debate, and I don't want to push you in any direction, but I think Councilor Williams, the next, after you do your 5-year recovery, whatever decision after the 5-year recovery, you are going to have to look at your infrastructure deficit, right? That's the $7 million. And there is a debate whether it's a $7 million paper deficit, because it's strictly a calculation based on, we say our roads are $500,000 a kilometer to rebuild, and X amount of dollars, and you come up with this depreciation that is flatline, right? Which over the period of the life of the asset, right? So there is, it's a number that has been predetermined, that is determined based on values, right? Those values change every year, and technology changes and a number of things change. So whether that 7.1 million or $8 million is a true asset, what we do know that the government tracks it as a criteria whether you're sustainable, right? What I can tell you is your infrastructure, you're not investing enough money in your infrastructure. So what this budget does do, when you put that money away, you're simply putting money in your reserves so that when you do get to your 5-year, finish your 5-year recovery plan, you can then now address your infrastructure asset deficit, and then you should have some reserves to deal with that so that you're on the right path of recovery, if you're can afford it.
And let me ask this question then too, because asset management is designed to replace that guess with solid numbers.
Yeah,
So
and I guess
our-
it's, yeah.
Our asset management program is supposed to be fully in place by next year, so that we'll have a 20-year road plan that we can actually share with people, and we'll know what's getting paved and what isn't. And
Unfortunate, your worship, there's a caveat, and that was our resource person has taken a medical leave,
Right.
which unfortunately has slowed that. We're still gathering the correct information, it's just, we're not doing it as fast. We don't have the knowledge base.
Councilor Dean?
So just to that point, so the asset management program gives you concrete metrics, if you will, but it's still subject to whatever value the user puts in, and whether council decides that, or somebody's got to decide the 500,000 or 400,000 or whatever it is. So the software is going to produce those metrics for you, but I mean, it's up to, those things could be changed. So you could, instead of using $500,000 per kilometer to rebuild a road, if you put into that formula 400,000, then it's gonna cost you less to replace that road. So,
Right, but the idea is that asset management stops that guessing. Like, we actually know the quality of the roads that we have, we know what the retirement life on them is, and we know how much they cost per kilometer. And if that's not the system that we have in place, I'm gonna get really upset, because that's what I understood it to be.
So the
So-
general terms, and you always refine it, your worship, so you're absolutely right. So this road, right now, we classify all our roads at $50,000 a kilometer to grade. But we know now we can go in and say, this road, Range Road, whatever it is actually 72,800. And then as we continue to track the actual expenditure, that number now gets refined, right? And over the years, you then determine the actual cost, right? So right now, we don't have a lot of historical data, and we're building that historical data because we know now the costs of culverts are X amount of dollars, and then this year they've gone up by 30%. So, and we know that we need to replace this culvert, right? So again, you continue to refine those, and those numbers become more and more accurate in regards to it. And that evaluation is then done based on that, find, actual information.
Counselor Colgan?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be a lot different than what most business people do. If you, for example, happen to do a short repair on a chunk of road, that is entered into the data, and it increases the value of that road and its life cycle because you've done that. So, in other words, as that data is entered, we begin to understand a little bit more how that is going to be. So we have to baseline somewhere. And I think that's what you're saying, is to take the guessing out of it, we have to have a baseline. And then that baseline will change as we get further down that road.
The resolution will get better based
Yeah.
on the data collection, yeah.
Yeah.
But starting off, it's still an estimate.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's why I say, well, that's why I keep using that number for municipal affairs at that 7-8 million and around there. Cause we just don't know. But I mean, what did the culverts come in at? 22 million if we had to replace every single culvert in the municipality? I don't think anybody expected that, so,
Yeah, because we found 1,600 of them last year.
yeah. And that's why, you know, can I have an extra approach? 6 times 1,600. Anyway. Councilor Wilhelm.
I'm not sure how we proceed with this, but my personal opinion is that we do the 12%, that we go with the proposed tax rate increases. But that being said, I understand the arguments for
Did you try?
what several council members would like to go with, but right now, the discussion hasn't swayed me further than where I was before. I think we should go with the original tax rate increases. Just to put my perspective out there and see if we can get the conversation moving.
Your worship, members of council, sorry, Councillor Williams has texted me and said he did have to interrupt, but he had to run due to his responsibilities in Swan Hill.
So we've got him marked as leaving the meeting?
At 7:21.
Councilor Kush.
Yes, I'm gonna I'll probably get lynched publicly for this, but I mean, we are sticking to our 3% tax increase that we set out in our, that's written in our recovery report as a tax increase with 3%. Unfortunately, the assessment coming in really high, it's kind of out of our control on that end. We have no control over where that sits. We have no control over what that number comes at. Government can come in whatever, like next year, and that assessment number could be way down low too, and we could be looking at what we gotta do to try to make up the difference if we're still following our recovery plan of 3%. So I still feel, given where we have budgeted, where our shortfalls are in our infrastructure, how we sit in, relative relation to, some of our municipal neighbors, where I guess kind of historically, where past councils should have made increases to catch up with stuff and didn't, and now we're trying to play catch up on it. It's a whole lot of stuff out there. I know it's gonna look really, really high on, the bills when people, everybody looks at the bottom line. They look at what they're paying over what they paid last year. And a lot of extra of that is due to an assessment value that we have no control over. And we're still holding to the 3% tax increase. If we get, unfortunately, hit by that, assessment reevaluation, it could end up putting us back where we're trying to play catch up again, like we were back in 2019, because we didn't budget accordingly. And one way will be, we'll have residents unhappy if we take a look at the assessments more than they, in some places it'll be more, some places might not be. But you'll also have residents unhappy if we're telling them that we didn't budget enough and we're trying to make cuts in services again to make up for what we have for tax, available tax again. It's kind of a, I think it would be easier to sell them that, we're following the assessment in our tax plan that we set out versus we didn't, essentially, the public look at it like we didn't budget accordingly. And we're short, and now we're having to cut things to be able to come in to just get through the year to the next tax season.
Councillor Coker.
Yeah, just to add to that part of the discussion, I think that part of it is very important. And I think that the conversation that's been generated through this makes us identify that we really have to have a look at that policy development and figure out exactly how we're gonna do that, and let's have a look at that prior to being at the 11th hour for the next go around. But I do tend to have to agree that we're in a place now where we've been pushed into, and we have to make this decision, and I would tend to feel that way as well.
Councillor Dean.
I'm just looking at the numbers off of this sheet. So the residential one, the second one, the increase in assessment year over year from 305, $305,330 to $327,530. That's a 7% increase in assessment. The bottom line that a resident pays, the difference between what they paid last year and this year is less than 1% increase. So their assessment's gone up 7%, they're paying less than 1% extra. Now that's taking into account that the school requisition has decreased. But still, from a bottom line percentage, it's not much of an increase for the residents.
Yep, and I appreciate that, and I want to thank you all for having this conversation as thoroughly as you did. So I'll support where council's going here. But I want everyone to remember this conversation. If we add any spending or we increase anything or add a service, and it's been an uncomfortable conversation, but we have to have these uncomfortable conversations. And I'm sorry if I've made it more uncomfortable than I've had to, but it's important. So with that, Councilor Cush.
Kind of following what you said though, but if we had this conversation and we didn't put any thought into it and we spent 5 minutes past it and moved on, the media would be all over that, and people, at least, especially having the screen, if people want to sit back and look at it, they can see that there has been a lot of thought in this. This isn't, something that we're just getting into. But I also thank Councillor Dean for actually pointing out that it might not, for some of the residents, it might not be as large of an impact as we're anticipating here. With that, I'll make the first motion. The council gives first reading to bylaw 600/2023 property tax rate.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Councillor Prestige.
I'll make a motion that council give second reading to the bylaw 600/23, 2023 property tax rate.
Thank you, Councillor Prestige. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? That is carried. Councillor Wilhelm.
A motion the council proceeds to the third and final reading to bylaw 600/23, the 2023 property tax rate.
Thank you, Councillor Wilhelm. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, and I see that is there any opposed? So I see that as unanimous. We can go to third reading. Councillor Kush.
I'll move the council gives third reading to bylaw 600/23, 2023 property tax rate.
Thank you, Councillor Kush. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Okay, that is the last item.
Three.
Sorry. Go
Your
ahead.
worship, members of council, I don't know if it's appropriate, but maybe a motion prior to the, motion by council indicating that prior to the 2024 budget deliberation, that administration draft a tax policy for council's consideration. I don't know if that,
If council's okay with it, I'd love to make that motion.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead, you make that motion, because I think you're the one that's been, I was gonna make the motion, but you're the one that's been passionate about it, and I absolutely agree with you, so.
Okay, I don't get to do them very often, so, yeah, I'll go ahead and, so this would be a notice of motion then, when we do it, or we're in a special meeting?
it's just a motion that prior to the 2024 budget deliberations,
Yep.
that council, administration draft.
Okay, and then, yeah, cause then we're doing budget deliberations, so we're having a conversation about expenditures and revenue as well, and, yeah, okay.
You're doing the tax rate policy so that administration knows how to
Perfect.
draft the budget.
Perfect.
Okay, so I would like to make the motion that, or I make the motion that prior to the 2024 budget deliberations, that administration bring back a taxation policy for us to review.
You can hit print.
Is that good for you?
That's lovely, thank you.
All right. Any discussion on the motion? No, we don't want to talk about it some more? Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Oh, Counselor Dean.
Motion to adjourn.
Discussion on motion to adjourn. All in favor?
I got one today, so.
We're out. Let us know.